Good morning, good afternoon, or good night. My name is Cassandra Garcia, and I will be presenting on behalf of my group, which include Cameron Lopez, myself, Diamond Mendoza, Kylie Sandoval, and Valerie Rodriguez. In Colombia during the 20th century, Luis Alfredo Garavito, also referred to as the Beast of Colombia, was a notorious killer with many victims. This man was born on January 25, 1957, in a town called Genova, Colombia. Throughout his 66 years of life, he was speculated to have killed over 300 boys. In this PowerPoint, we will find out what motivated him and what did he do to get named a notorious killer. Garavito was classified as a hedonistic lust killer. His main motivation throughout his killing sprees would be sexual pleasure. He was said to be a sexual sadist, mutilating of his victim. Seeking pleasure from pain, would find joy in causing others pain from prolonged periods, and repeating heinous acts as well as escalating his deed, always following a pattern for each and becoming more brutal with each killing. From 1982 to 1989, a span of 7 years, Garavito was active, committing several murders and mutilations of children throughout the Colombian area. In 1992, he commenced his killing spree with victims such as street children. In 1994, children's missing cases started to increase, and although with no real ties, it was speculated he had a part in them. In 1987, many decomposed bodies of young boys were found, notifying the authorities that there was someone out there killing all of these young boys. In 1999, finally through an escaped victim, Garavito was arrested in Villavicencio, which led to his confession and conviction. Garavito was born into a very abusive and hostile environment. He went through physical abuse and sexual abuse, which had a huge impact on him and resulted in twisting the way he saw sex and violence. As he grew up in an atmosphere where violence was prevalent, he was not affected by the suffering of others as well as the physical abuse endured by himself, thereby confusing pain with pleasure. That made him feel weak and vulnerable. By hurting his victims, he would regain power and authority he had never had during his younger years. He was also known to be a great manipulator and sadist and have no remorse. To manipulate his victims into trusting him, he would dress up as a trustworthy figure. Confidence was not something he lacked. Throughout this, his confidence needed to be high in order to manipulate his victims into going with him. Along with being manipulative, he was also a sadist, deriving pleasure from pain of others, having intense sexual and physical aggression, prolonging the death of his victims by extreme methods of torture. His lack of remorse led him to think that he was not doing anything completely wrong. Being devoid of empathy and guilt also was considered psychopathic behaviors. Even at his confession or trial session, he described the events of his actions. He delivered it without remorse or empathy towards his victims. As Garavito grew up in an abusive home, his parents were no short of mean and cruel to him. His father was an alcoholic and would severely punch and beat him up. Those around him would sexually abusive to him and commit violent acts towards him. He had little to no familial support with no positive role models. Along with his familial troubles, Colombia was currently in a poor socioeconomic condition, with constant civil wars among those in poverty led with crimes like murder to be taken more casually, with most not having any legal consequences to follow. As for his victims, he preyed on younger boys ages ranging from 6 to 16. He would go for low-risk victims and use ruses to gain their trust. They would either be homeless children or would come from unstable homes, hence as to why their disappearance was less likely to be flagged. Using money, presents, or even job opportunities was some of his techniques he mostly used. Some of the disguises used by Luis was priest, teachers, vendors, or other non dangerous figures. He regularly would alternate his self image to avoid being caught or raise suspicion. Every move made by Garavito was brutal yet calculated. He would lure his victims using a ruse to a secluded spot such as an alleyway, abandoned area, or somewhere with little to no witnesses, and would drug or intoxicate them. He would then proceed to tie up the wrist and begin his intense torturing. Some torture caused by him would be stabbing, strangulation, or even mutilation. His crimes were committed all over Colombia. With no designated town or area, Garavito was able to avoid police detection. He would constantly relocate and never stay in one place for long periods of time. With his several evasion tricks, Garavito avoided any attention from authorities. His constant relocating, victim preference, use of disguises, and even body placement, with him burying his victims in deep, shallow graves, allowed him to roam free for 7 years without any high suspicion it was him. In conclusion, he was a unique serial killer due to his high volume of victims and brutality. He would use his size and strength as a weapon. He would overuse and deliver excessive torture, which could last for days at times. And with that, almost 300 possible deaths caused by him, and in confession, he only admitted to 147 deaths. Just as a warning, some of the images in the next slide include crime scene photos of mass graves of victims. Luis Garavito was a man with a terrible past who committed heinous acts. For that, many lives were lost. With that, I'd like to say thank you for sitting through this PowerPoint, and I hope you learned something new.